On the 29th of April, 1945, in Dachau, Germany, American troops entered the concentration camp and were horrified by the sight of heaps of corpses. Thousands of emaciated prisoners clung to life, while the gas chambers remained warm from recent usage. The stench of death hung in the air. Nearby, 50 SS guards gave themselves up, and the American soldiers glanced from the captives to the corpses and back again. That scene sparked one of the war's greatest controversies. Within a few hours, every one of those 50 SS guards was shot and killed after having surrendered, an unequivocal war crime. When reports arrived at command, high-ranking officers called for legal action, court-martial the troops, bring charges, and set a deterrent precedent. Patton faced a dilemma: either discipline his men for executing the camp guards, or shield them and conceal the offense. Here's the account of Patton's response when pressured to penalize his own soldiers for an act he might have committed himself. Remember to subscribe before we proceed. Our channel shares World War narratives that compel us to grapple with the toughest dilemmas surrounding conflict, fairness, and human compassion. To grasp the events at Dachau, you must appreciate what the American troops encountered when they arrived. The 45th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Thunderbirds, had spent 2 years battling through Europe and had experienced fierce combat in Sicily. They had endured Italy, France, and now Germany seasoned fighters who had witnessed war's horrors. Yet nothing steeled them for Dachau. The camp had functioned since 1933, a dozen years of abuse, hunger, medical atrocities, and systematic killing. More than 40,000 souls had perished there. When the Americans came, some 30,000 inmates remained, though barely surviving. The initial troops entering the camp halted. Several vomited, others wept, and some simply stood frozen, unable to comprehend the scene. 39 rail cars were packed with corpses, thousands of bodies piled up like freight, abandoned to decay. The odor was suffocating. Within the camp, the living appeared indistinguishable from the dead. Ghostly figures in striped garb, with hollow eyes and skin taut over bone, shuffled weakly. Some were too frail to stand. The troops viewed the gas chambers, crematoria, medical testing rooms, and solitary cells where inmates starved. All around lay proof of methodical, structured, factory-style killing. Private John Lee, one of the soldiers, later recounted, "We believed we understood the face of evil. We had battled it for 2 years, but this was a different realm. This was hell brought to earth." The SS guards were aware of the Americans' approach. The majority had escaped, but roughly 50 stayed behind. A few were overly arrogant. Others had no escape route. Some sincerely thought they bore no guilt. As the Americans marched into the camp, those guards dropped their arms and lifted their hands in surrender. Under the Geneva Convention, those guards became prisoners of war, deserving safeguards. Yet the American troops paid no heed to international law. Their minds were filled with images of the railcar corpses, the gaunt prisoners, the warehouses stacked with children's garments, and the crematory ovens still holding human ashes. What followed was unplanned, unauthorized, a burst of impulsive fury. One soldier lifted his weapon and shot an SS guard in the head. Then a second soldier acted similarly, and then another. Several guards attempted to flee, only to be shot from behind. Some guards pleaded for compassion, yet they were gunned down regardless. A handful were clubbed to death with rifle stocks. In less than 20 minutes, around 50 SS guards lay dead. Some reports claim a higher toll, though the precise figure remains debated. But one thing is indisputable: American troops killed captives who had surrendered. This constituted homicide, a breach of wartime rules, an outright violation of global law, and certain American soldiers felt no remorse. In private, some admitted, "I realize our actions were unlawful from a legal and technical standpoint. Yet having witnessed their atrocities, inhaled the oven stench, and gazed into the prisoners' eyes, I cannot swear I wouldn't repeat the deed." Not every American joined in. Several officers attempted to halt the bloodshed. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, who led one of the battalions, stepped in physically. He interceded, placing his own body between his troops and the surviving SS guards. He later recounted seizing a soldier's rifle, yelling for his men to cease, and threatening to shoot anyone who discharged another round. The executions halted, but the harm was irrevocable. Within hours, the incident was reported to Division Command, then Corps, then Army Headquarters, and ultimately reached General George S. Patton. Patton was already present at Dachau. He had arrived the day following liberation to personally inspect the camp. He passed through the identical gates his men had entered, viewed the same rail cars, the same corpses, the same emaciated inmates. His response was gut-wrenching. He emerged from a barracks and threw up. Here was a veteran of 2 world wars, a commander who had led troops in history's most savage battles, and he vomited. He commanded that German citizens from the neighboring town be fetched to the camp, compelled them to witness the horrors, and ordered them to enter the dead. He desired that they comprehend what had been carried out on their behalf. However, soon the report arrived, detailing his soldiers' actions, the killings, the war crime. Patton reviewed the initial inquiry, testimonies, and physical proof. The events were unmistakable, and pressure to act mounted rapidly. The Inspector General's department demanded a thorough probe. They sought criminal charges, courts-martial, and imprisonment. The Judge Advocate General's office concurred that this amounted to murder. American troops had killed captured enemy combatants. There absolutely had to be repercussions. Even General Eisenhower offered his input. A message arrived from the Supreme Commander. This cannot be hidden. We must not turn into the very thing we oppose. The case was placed on Patton's desk with an unmistakable directive: prosecute, impose punishment, and make amends. Patton sat at his desk, with the investigation report before him and Dachau, photographs scattered across the surface. Patton faced a critical decision. One side represented the law, the rules of warfare, the Geneva Convention, the very principles distinguishing civilized societies from barbaric ones. Failing to prosecute would mean endorsing murder, establishing a precedent that war crimes were permissible provided the victims were sufficiently villainous. Yet on the opposing side stood his soldiers, men who had fought for 3 years, witnessed the deaths of their comrades, entered hell itself, and reacted with very human fury. Prosecuting them would ruin the lives of individuals who had acted as anyone might in such circumstances. How would you have acted? Patton swiftly reached his conclusion. He summoned his staff and instructed them to draft a response for the Inspector General. The reply was quintessential: Patton direct, unrepentant, and skillfully phrased to shield his troops while conceding the situation. He penned, "I have looked into the accusations. The evidence remains inconclusive. Amid the turmoil of liberating the camp with thousands of inmates, disorganized SS personnel, and gunfire from leftover German positions, it is impossible to definitively distinguish deaths caused by combat from those that were not. While technically accurate, the liberation was indeed chaotic, resistance occurred, and some Germans shot at Americans. The statement was intentionally deceptive." Patton was fully aware of the actual events. Having reviewed the witness testimonies, he understood that his men had shot prisoners who had surrendered. He added, "Moreover, even if executions took place, I consider the emotional and psychological condition of soldiers newly exposed to Dachau's atrocities as a crucial mitigating factor. The evidence of such enormous crimes leads to the plausible conclusion of temporary insanity. Temporary insanity, a recognized legal defense. Patton was safeguarding his troops, yet he did not stop there. I refuse to court-martial soldiers for executing SS guards at a death camp. If that makes me an accomplice to a war crime, then so be it. I will not ruin American soldiers for acting in a way I myself might have acted in their shoes." The final sentence was crucial. What I myself might have done. Patton was confessing that, faced with the same scenario and horrors, he too might have pulled the trigger. He was aligning himself morally with his soldiers. The response traveled up the chain of command and generated a dilemma. The Inspector General's office was outraged. This constituted obstruction and a cover-up, with Patton as an accomplice, shielding war criminals. The Judge Advocate General drafted a memorandum advocating for Patton's dismissal. If Patton would not prosecute, then another should step in. But then something intriguing occurred. The memo went nowhere. Why? Because at the upper echelons of command, leaders began posing awkward questions. What would a trial entail? American soldiers testifying about their Dachau experiences, with defense attorneys calling Holocaust survivors to the witness stand. Images of gas chambers and mass graves were presented to a jury. The outcome became almost irrelevant. The trial itself would place the entire American military justice system in an untenable situation. A conviction would suggest America valued SS guards' lives more than Holocaust victims. An acquittal would set a precedent that war crimes were permissible under specific emotional conditions. Either scenario was a nightmare. Thus, the investigation quietly faded away, buried in documents, classified, labeled inconclusive. The soldiers who had fired never faced charges, prosecution, or punishment. Patton's shield had succeeded, but in later years, historians would argue whether it was justice or a cover-up. Some contend Patton was correct that prosecuting soldiers for human fury in response to industrial-scale murder would have been unjust. They claim the Dachau SS guards had lost any right to legal protection. Due to their involvement in genocide, others maintain that Patton erred. They argue that the rule of law is most important precisely when it is hardest to uphold. Excusing war crimes when the victims are evil would strip us of moral authority to prosecute such crimes entirely. Both arguments carry weight. What is clear is that Patton prioritized his soldiers over the law. He chose to shield the men under his command rather than uphold abstract justice. He sincerely believed that his soldiers' actions were wrong, yet also believed that punishing them would be even worse. In his personal diary, he penned, "I cannot convict men for carrying out in the heat of the moment what the world should have accomplished through policy years earlier. If executing SS guards is a crime, then we are all guilty for not shutting down the camp earlier." That might be the frankest evaluation of the entire affair. The killings at Dachau remain among the most debated moments of World War II. It's not that anyone justifies the SS guards, but rather it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. War creates scenarios where every option is bad, where law and justice do not align, situations where doing the right thing and doing the legal thing are not identical. Patton understood that, and he made his choice. The soldiers who carried out the execution of those SS guards returned home. They lived their lives. Some felt remorse. Others did not. But none faced a court-martial, because Patton believed that certain crimes committed in the face of unimaginable evil deserved understanding more than punishment. If you had been in Patton's position, would you have prosecuted your own soldiers? Or would you have protected them? Let us know in the comments section. And if you want more World War II stories that don't have simple answers, be sure to subscribe.